My lords, Paladin ships, are they worth it? Today I hope to be able to answer that question. Following on from last week's report regarding an empire who followed the benevolent ambition to defend the galaxy, this week we shall delve into the murky realms of the Paladin initiative, and I hope to determine their strength in battle, but ultimately answer the question of whether they're worth pursuing or not. But how do we get them? Paladin ships can only be acquired if an empire follows the Defender of the Galaxy ambition path, and of course several more boxes need to be ticked. During the Defender of the Galaxy path, one step is to reach the stage of Galactic Custodian. This is required for Paladins. Then a specific Galcom resolution must be passed called the Paladin Initiative. When completed, members of the Galactic Council, which of course also includes the Custodian, have the option of building one Paladin vessel each. The largest the Council can become is 5 and the lowest is 1. Well, technically 0, but you get the idea. This means that you can have a maximum of 5 Paladin ships in the galaxy at one time. Frustratingly, the Paladin ships cannot be merged with regular fleets, leaving them to amble about by themselves, pretending to live the Sigma lifestyle. Whether accurate or not, we shall see. Now, normally each council member gets control of their own Paladin ship. However, should the direct command resolution be passed, then the Custodian will gain control of each Paladin vessel, and if an empire takes the council seat of another empire, then they gain control of the previous empire's Paladin ship, but not if the Custodian already controls it. We've established a maximum of 5 Paladin ships can exist at any one time, all potentially under the control of the Custodian. Commanders can be assigned to pilot Paladin ships. This will give them the Paladin trait, removing any upkeep for that leader, and it also provides a flat 5 reduction from all damage for all ships, if that Paladin is also on your council, which is kind of cool. A second trait can also be chosen, and this is where the power of the Paladins really begin to reveal themselves. 7 traits exist. They are, in alphabetical order, Ace Pilot. This gives your Paladin ship a 50% evasion chance, and your ships, if assigned to the council, a 5% evasion chance. It also unlocks the power Air Superiority, but we'll come on to powers shortly. The Architect trait reduces ship upkeep for all fleets in system by 15%, which is really lovely, but being that it's only fleets in system, it sort of just encourages you to keep your fleets as a giant doomstack. Defender, which we will touch on individually later as it's fantastic, gives your Paladin ship a 40% damage reduction at the cost of 20% evasion, and also can give you ship-wide damage reduction if assigned to the council. Mastermind gives you 30% ship fire rate for all fleets in system, which is jolly lovely. Spearhead, which we will also touch on later by itself, can give you 10% bonus relative damage to size for your Paladin ship, and a 5% ship weapons damage across the Empire. Knight is like Spearhead, but just a little bit better, and that's specific to Knights of the Toxic God, and as I said, I'll touch on this later. And then finally Ranger, which gives you 15% tracking, 15% ship weapons damage, and a tracking and cloaking bonus Empire-wide. Now each one of those traits comes with a specific power, or ability. These are buttons that can be pressed independently during combat which provide additional bonuses. Now these bonuses will vary depending on the ability, some affect just the Paladin ship, some affect friendly fleets, and some affect enemy fleets. Each of the traits I just detailed unlocks a specific ability. Ace Pilot gives you air superiority. If you press that button, you will get a minus 85% point defense damage, strikecraft damage, and strikecraft regeneration for all enemy ships for 3 months. So that is fantastic against enemies that are using huge amounts of strikecraft. Field Repairs is unlocked by Architect. That gives you 10% hull regeneration, armor regeneration, and armor hardening for all friendly ships, which is reasonable and valuable, but probably not the best defensive option in my opinion. I'll skip over For the Order and just touch on Hold the Line, as For the Order is the Knight version, which is just slightly better. Spearhead, which provides Hold the Line, gives some pretty insane buffs. This increases ship fire rate by 25%, it gives your ships a flat 25% damage reduction, it gives you a flat 25 armor penetration, and it gives you bonus damage to relative ship size. We will address Hold the Line specifically later on in the report. Defender gives you Taunt, which gives you a flat 35 damage reduction and a 45% damage reduction, as well as a focus fire effect for 3 months, basically making you a giant tank. Mastermind gives you Plan B. This gives you a flat 10 damage reduction, and it gives you shield and armor penetration, including 50% accuracy for all friendly ships in system. And finally, Ranger, which gives Sudden Strike. This gives you increased fire rate, increased shield and armor penetration, and increased accuracy for all ships in system. These are incredibly powerful buffs, and it's worth me stating, these buffs stack. Further to these trait abilities, you also get default ones: Paladin Aegis, Lance of Valor, and Recall. Paladin Aegis gives you 1000% shield hit points, 75% daily shield regeneration, and 15% hardening for 3 months. That would be fantastic to combine with something like Taunt, which we will look at shortly. Lance of Valor. This is also known as the Power of Friendship cannon. This does damage to enemy ships based on your diplomatic weight, and we do have a section on this shortly. And Recall. This teleports your paladin to the nearest non-hostile starbase or arc ship and repairs 25% of its hull and armor instantly. In addition to this, there is one more you can have. So at any one time, a paladin can have 5 different abilities. We've just covered 4, so you get the 3 that I just mentioned plus the 1 from the trait, and then 1 more can be unlocked via a further Galcom resolution. This is called the Focused Paladin Initiative. 3 are available, but you can only choose 1 of the 3. Field testing is sort of a roll of the dice, as pictured by its icon. This gives a 60% chance that something good will happen, and a 20% chance something bad will happen. Which makes me wonder if there's also a 20% chance that nothing will happen? This is a bit funny, because what you really want to happen is 20% chance the largest hostile fleet in system loses 99% of its hull. That could be really great or not really great at all. I'm not too sure you could rely on that. Harmony gives you a 7.5% damage reduction, an increase in fire rate and evasion chance per paladin in system. That could be really fantastic. And On My Command gives you a 20% range, damage and sublight speed for all friendly ships for 3 months. So these abilities are really jolly powerful indeed. And if these 5 abilities aren't enough, you can max out your paladin ships even further via the Training Paladin Initiative resolution. Again, only one of these 3 can be passed, so choose wisely. Synergy gives your paladins in system a 2.5% damage reduction and fire rate. You could of course increase this to 12.5% with all 5 paladins. Defense means your paladin leader trait now grants 25% evasion and 20% daily shield regeneration. Again, absolutely fantastic when you stack it with some of the other buffs. And offense, the paladin leader now grants 30 ship weapon damage and 25% ship weapons range. Again, a fantastic buff, particularly when you begin to stack it with everything else. So that more or less covers the various things that paladins can do and have access to. But are they actually worth building? Well, I think it's time we do some testing. There are 2 different approaches I want to test. I want to use the paladin as a tank, and I want to try and use it as a glass cannon. Let's start with tank, as this is by far and away the most unique and niche role in our galaxy. Nothing else can really fit this role, whereas lots of other things can do damage. Indeed, we've demonstrated this with arc ships. So let's get into tanking. When creating our tank paladin, we have clear traits that jump out towards us. Ace Pilot provides 55% evasion when the paladin is on the council, and Defender provides 45% damage reduction, but it does reduce our evasion by 20%. Now remember, we get the abilities as well. Ace Pilot doesn't give us much defense here, but Defender gives Taunt, which is amazing, giving us flat 35 damage reduction and 45% reduction with the 1000% focus fire effect. This is clearly the right choice for a tank. Sadly, we don't get to choose them both here, we can only choose one, and although I think evasion is clearly fantastic, potentially more so given the relative weakness of the Paladin ship, our example here only has a mere 1800 hull, I think broadly evasion is more valuable than damage reduction, but ultimately I think we can get evasion elsewhere. Now ideally we want to get up to 90%, which is the cap, and I think we could probably do that. In fact, I rather sadly only managed 78.45% evasion when I found myself in Satana's home system. She is the device that we're going to test our tank out upon. However, despite our rather large evasion, I think it's fair to say that 80% is still pretty great. I did manage to reach over 100% damage reduction. This is from a combination of the Defender trait, which provides 45%, Paladin on the Council and a leader level of 10, giving us an additional 20%, and the Taunt ability, giving us another 45%. In theory, this should total at 110%, thus making our little Paladin ship entirely invulnerable, and that doesn't even include the flat damage reduction that we get from some of those traits as well. However, as you can see, despite this, our little Paladin ship gets deleted in one single shot. Thus I suspect there is a cap on damage reduction, and it's probably 90%, though given that these buffs are still largely unique and specific to the Paladin ship, I didn't go hunting for the specific cap, as I think regardless of what it is, the Paladin ship is not going to be very effective as a tank, certainly against a high level Crisis and 200x Satana. Well, she makes the point. But even at 90% reduction, it's still not amazing, though I will concede it could act as a reasonable screening tool when up against a more regular fleet, a fairer test I guess. One battleship with a Giga Cannon would take approximately 93 shots instead of 10 to kill the thing, and that doesn't factor in evasion at all. I think it's fair to say as a tank it's not entirely worthless for the average user, but if you are trying to defeat a high level Crisis, I wouldn't use it in this capacity. I'd also like to say a big thank you to the noob who provided me with the save that I used to test some of these features. Thank you. So clearly we've seen just how successful a Paladin tank can be, but what about offense? Offensively, we've seen a ton of options, which are all lovely, but there's two things I want to test out. The first is the power of the Friendship Cannon, and I'm going to insert my opinion here. I think this is a really dumb feature, and it shouldn't be a thing in the game. It exists, so let's look at it. The Paladin ability, the Lance of Valor, offers 3750 damage to a random enemy fleet, and repeats for every 100,000 diplomatic weight you have. On the face of it, this is really underwhelming, and spoiler, when we look into the details, it remains really underwhelming. When we delve into the code, what actually happens when you fire the weapon is that it splits the damage between 5 ships, meaning 5 ships take 750 damage. Now 750 damage is a very inconsequential number. This won't even destroy a corvette with tier 5 defensive components, which by the time you get a Paladin ship, everything is going to have. Okay, but the weapon scales with diplomatic weight, right? Well, it does. You get an additional 3750 split between 5 ships per 100,000 diplomatic weight. So at 500,000 diplomatic weight, which I think is a pretty reasonable number, you're doing 3750 damage per ship to 5 ships. Or if only one ship exists in the target fleet, 18,750 damage. This would be enough to destroy a tier 5 equipped cruiser, but not a battleship. And I'd reiterate, I think 500k diplomatic weight is a pretty reasonable number for an endgame empire. Of course you can take your diplomatic weight much higher, but even if we double it to 1 million, the weapon is still doing less than 40,000 damage, which is the equivalent of 4 Titan Perdition beams with no repeatables. I think it's extremely underwhelming indeed, and quite frankly I can't see a reason ever to use it, which makes me even more annoyed that it's a thing at all, as we now have this ridiculous friendship gun which has no place in the game, but the big joke is, it's entirely unusable anyway. I have to ask, who's this for? Because it's clearly not being used by anyone fighting a high level Crisis given the tremendous levels of defences that they have, but it's also largely pointless for fighting a 1x Crisis or even your neighbour's fleet. I think the TLDR, offensively, this is a complete waste of time, and it also costs 5,000 energy to fire, for reasons. But I promise you all is not lost, as one trait exists that makes the Paladin ships really jolly broken, which seems to be a bit of a trend with nomads actually and power levels. But anyway, Spearhead. We touched on this earlier, and remember Knights of the Toxic God get an even better version called Knight, but we'll look at Spearhead. It provides the Paladin ship with bonus damage to ships based on how large they are, which is fantastic, but its real power comes in the form of its ability, Hold the Line. You press the button, the ability goes active. This is giving you 25% ship fire rate, flat 25 damage reduction, flat 25 armor penetration, but by far and away the most important thing it's giving you is 5% increased weapon damage multiplied by the size of the ship, meaning a size 1 ship takes 5% increased damage, a size 10 ship takes 50% increased damage. Now what's really cool, and I've not really touched on it yet, is you can have 5 Paladin ships, and these powers stack. Therefore, 5 Paladins with Spearhead activating Hold the Line at the same time, you get 25% increased damage per ship size. Now, do you remember when ship sizes changed? So a Corvette is now 5. That means your guns do an additional 125% increased damage to a Corvette. How big do you think a battleship is? Yep, it's size 40. That's 1000% increased damage. Now what about an actual threat, like say Queen Zatanna, who will be making her reappearance shortly? She has a ship size of 640. This gives you a 16,000% damage increase. Now also, neutron launchers exist, which do an additional 20% damage by ship size. Now normally this means they do an additional 12,800 increased damage to Zatanna, but I'm told when combined, this actually multiplies the damage rather than adding it together, as I shall now demonstrate. Alas my lords, it's all for naught. The Paladin powers, it seems, do not stack after all, and we were sold a complete lie. Despite the massive increase in neutron launcher damage as promised, Zatanna easily defeats 7k naval cap of Zro launcher cruisers. It is extremely disappointing, and that kind of sums up my thoughts on Paladin ships really. A bit of a disappointment. I guess in theme they are quite cool, though being so small makes them difficult to see and actually experience, in my opinion. The fleet-wide buffs they provide certainly aren't horrible by any means, but is it game-changing? I'm not sure. Still, we do have the broken arc ships, so let's give Zatanna what's for, a fully decked out arc ship with the Knights loadout I used in the largest arc ship report. Yes, now that's how you do it. Very satisfying. So, are Paladin ships worth it? Not really.